Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second and final edition of Entrepreneurons for the fall semester this year. My name is Laura Heisler. I'm Director of Programming at the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, and WARF, along with D2P, are delighted to present this series on an ongoing basis every academic year. Before I turn things over to today's moderator, I did want to do a couple of housekeeping tasks, including letting you know how today's session is going to go. But before that, I want to acknowledge the land that we're on for those of us in the room and for many of you joining us over Zoom. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Teejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state governments repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. So today we are going to, as you can see, have a panel discussion. And to moderate today's panel, we have Amy Arnold-Dusin, Innovation and Commercialization Mentor at D2P. We always engage audience questions as part of Entrepreneurons. For those of you in the room, we're going to ask that you line up at the mic that you see in the middle of the room. That's our way of having a low touch approach to capturing your questions. For those of you online, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will be your spokesperson and ask your questions on your behalf. And I will mention that we're recording today's session, so if you want to catch it again or send it to other folks, you'll be able to find it on the warf.org website, I think within a day or so. So be on the lookout for that. And with that, I am delighted to welcome Amy Arnold-Dusin to guide today's discussion. Amy, over to you.
Thank you all and welcome. So Entrepreneur magazine has a very famous infographic that you may have seen. It's the top 20 reasons that startups fail. And number one on that list is no market need. Number two on that is ran out of cash. But number three is not the right team. And that's what we're going to discuss here, how to build the right team. As Laura mentioned, my name is Amy Arnold-Dusin, and I'm here on campus at Discovery to Product. And I'm one of the mentors, and we have a great panel here today to provide different perspectives on building this panel. And so I'm first going to have each panel member spend 30 to 60 seconds introducing yourself, and then we'll get to the questions. I have a few prepared questions, and then we'll engage the audience in question and answer time period.
Chaudhary. I am the CEO and co-founder of Immunoscientific. Immunoscientific was born from an idea that was developed at UW-Madison. When I was getting my PhD here, we worked on a technology that we developed in our labs at UW. WARF patented the technology. And then I did market research, customer discovery, and figured out, how to commercialize this technology. And then we spun out this company, Immunoscientific, out of the university. We're now located in Research Park. We're actually moving to a new location by the airport pretty soon. So that's our company, born and developed at UW-Madison.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Keenan. I'm a senior director in the WARF Venture Office. I have the great privilege to invest in both technology and teams through two programs at WARF. One is through our accelerator program, which invests in pre-company, pre-licensed technologies on campus, like Faraz's company. And the idea of that program is to invest in technology and teams to fund a commercially relevant milestone that we can use to attract investors and industry partnerships. The other program is our WARF Ventures Fund, where we invest money in companies that are commercializing UW-Madison technology, and that is a traditional venture fund where we invest in equity in those companies with the expectation that we'll generate a return through the company's success.
My name is Ann Smith, and I am the co-founder of the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic. So I'm a founder in some respects. I just didn't have to make money because people that get services from us, they get the services provided by the student, and they're supervised by licensed lawyers like me, and they don't pay for those services. We provide services to about 300 clients a year, and have been doing it for just over 10 years.
Hello, my name is Ginger Octor. I'm Director Scientific Talent with Carrick's Consulting Group. We're a boutique firm located right here in Madison. We actually work with startups through larger corporations, essentially support them on their staffing and talent needs.
And I'm Becky Menifee, and I am the Vice President of Sales for M3 Insurance, M3 Elevate specifically. And we focus on insurance products that are tailored towards small to growing businesses. So we do work with a lot of startup companies. We do actually have a strong partnership with the Small Business Center here as well. And so we help a lot of small growing businesses start out with the basic fundamentals of insurance that you will need to start your business. It starts from as simple as business insurance that kind of gets you running. And then our teams will come in and also help you build the right benefits package to help attract the right talent to your doorstep.
Thank you all. So you can see that this panel has a variety of perspectives, from Faraz starting at the university and transitioning his company out of the university, to Greg, who has more of a big picture perspective, has seen many teams go and build their companies out, to the service providers from legal and recruiting and insurance. And so it takes a team to build a team. And so I'm going to start off with Faraz. So Faraz, you represent that transition from university research to a startup. Can you briefly share what your team looks like now and how that's evolved over the past year or two? And then what do you foresee for the next year or two your team to look like?
Sure. So initially, our team was 6 people, all co-inventors of the technology. So that included 2 professors and 4 students at that time when we were developing the technology. The company was formed in 2018. And at that time, we were not commercial. The company was formed so that we can finalize the research that we need to do to get the technology ready. And at that time, all 6 people were involved. In 2020, actually right in the middle of COVID, we started fundraising. At that time, our technology was fully developed. We had a couple of customers who were interested. We were ready to go commercial. So when we started fundraising, it was kind of the time to make a decision. Are you going to be part of the company? Or is this something that you're not going to be involved full time? So after that transition happened, I went full time with the company. Our CTO, Dan Benjamin, went full time. One of the professors, Mike Sussman, joined part time as a CSO. And everyone else are consultants or advisors. They don't have full time roles anymore. So right now we have 2 full-time employees, 2 part-time. We have another CFO who's a part-time employee as well, who's a professor at the business school. So that's our team at this time.
And where do you foresee in a year or two, what will the team look like then in terms of size?
Yeah, so we are actively hiring, and we're working with Ginger and a couple other recruiters in trying to do that. So we are looking to hire 2 or 3 full-time lab scientists in the next, hopefully, 6 months. And then we're also going to hire a full-time CSO who will essentially replace Mike Sussman. Since Mike is a professor at the university, he'll step down from his role and be an advisor.
So I think this is a great example of a dynamic team that changes with the development of the company and the technology. So I now want to move to Ann and take a legal perspective. Ann, you just heard about Faraz's story, and I'm sure you've worked with him over time. What advice do you give companies on how to handle these company roles, the expectations of the team members, and how to handle ownership and transitions from the university to the small business? So I imagine there are times when people are exploring how best to be involved, and what kind of guidance do you leave and provide for these team members?
Well, the transition from the university to the private sector is a big decision that companies have to make. There are a lot of resources available on campus that they can take advantage of while they're here, and they don't want to leave too soon. They want to make sure that they maximize their ability to develop their technology while they're here, because it's really an economical way for them to do it. It's good science for the university, and it helps, it's like a win-win for everybody. Greg's program isn't available once they're a company. So there's certain things that they can't do once you form a company and are functioning on your own. There's also things like immigration status. If you have students on your team that are here they're on an F1 visa, which is a student visa, they can't start they aren't supposed to start a business, or there's lots of rules around whether they can and can't and what they can do. So I think that if you have multiple students on your team, we've counseled teams in how to stage their departure from campus so that they maximize the time they had with those students. So I think those are big. When do you leave because you need to, because you've taken advantage of the resources that are here to develop your technology? Now it's time to get out, but what do I do about the students? So they're both very strategic that you should be thinking about early and often as you develop your company. Once you form your company, I think the most important thing you should talk about is who's going to do what. It's not always easy for us. It sounds like everybody went in nice spots, but that doesn't always happen that way. And you have to talk it through and decide who gets what amount of ownership. That is not always easy. We always recommend that even the founders vest in their shares, because we see too many times when, especially if you have students involved or even PhD students, suddenly they get an offer they can't refuse and they want to leave 6 months into it. And you don't want them ultimately on your cap table when they're not there anymore. You have something to explain to investors. So we encourage everybody to use vesting schedules, which means you don't get the shares. They're not actually yours. You get to vote that number of shares, but you don't actually own them until you have vested. So those are some quick pointers for moving away from campus.
Thank you, Ann. So Greg, you sit in the position where you see all kinds of teams, and maybe you can share from the wharf and the investor point of view, red flags of a team that's maybe not well-formed or a good team that makes bad decisions.
So I'll answer this with the positive spin, and then we'll show some of the things we've seen that kind of highlight the positives, but get to your question. First of all, Wharf has an immense portfolio of patents that represent great ideas and technologies, but those technologies go nowhere without execution. So in all of the, whether it's my accelerator program or our venture fund, we're looking, is the project team, is the company structured and staffed to execute? And so for us, what does that mean? Some of the things that we're looking for, first, we're looking for a team that has complementary skills. And so we want to see a team that recognizes, and founders that recognize, oh, I need a team. And and sometimes that's, seems intuitively obvious. I want a team, but many times we need to work with our founders to appreciate the need to have a diverse set of skills and talent around the table. So we're looking, first and foremost because we're working in many cases, very early stage with individuals that see the value in bringing in complementary skills. Two, and I think Ann mentioned this a bit, we also are looking for alignment. We want to see teams that are aligned around a mission and vision and goals. And there are many cases when we take a pitch from a company that has a CEO and maybe a CFO and some other members of the team, you can start to pick out through your questions that, wow, this team is not aligned. That does not make for a great investment. So, we want to see teams that complementary skills that are aligned. We also want to see a dedication to the project. Faraz had a lot of great opportunities to go and work for a big company, but he left the university to start his company full time as the CEO. And if you're really serious about starting a technology business, you can't be a part-time CEO. And so we're looking for, when we make investments, particularly in our venture fund, we're looking for that dedicated commitment from the management team and the employees. And one of the things that we see as a red flag, or when we're looking at teams, there's an evolution as technologies leave the university and grow. What the team looks like when you first spin out from the university is going to look very different when you're scaling your business. And so we like to see the right team for the stage, right? So some of the red flags for us are, many times an early stage company coming right off the university doesn't need a high-powered CEO, and you can waste a lot of time, money, and stock bringing in a CEO too early. So that's just one example. And I think that's an area where teams, founders should talk to lawyers and investors like ourselves and experienced entrepreneurs to get a sense for what should the team look like for my company and my market. So, you don't want to, many times we'll see an early stage company and they've got a CEO, a CFO, a COO, they got a full C-suite, but no business yet, right? So that's a red flag to us when you've got a bunch of C-level employees and no business yet. So, that's an extreme version.
Unless it's one person that keeps putting a different hat on.
Exactly. So, get out and talk to people and understand what the right team should be for your particular market opportunity. And then, one of the things that I've learned over time as I've invested in more companies, particularly later stage companies, because when you get a really sophisticated management team pitching you, they know all the things they're supposed to say. One of the ways to tease out how effective a team is, ask them for the turnover. Ask them to see, again, this is particularly for later stage companies. I've seen companies with 20 people as employees. They have more people that have left the company than are currently in the company. That's not a great sign. So again, that's just, one of the big red flags we look for is, what's the turnover? What's the morale of the team? So I'll go, just to summarize for us, it's recognize you need a team, complementary skills, alignment, right team for the stage.
Thank you, Greg. Those are great thoughts and observations. And what I particularly like hearing is go talk to people and see how your team looks from the outside. Continue networking and talking to people.
And don't give away those shares until you
Right.
until you
have to.
until you have
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
So we're now to the time where it's time to hire an outstanding team member. Let's talk to Ginger. Ginger, can you share what's next? At what stage do startups start contacting you to help recruit new team members to fill a role?
And I think usually what we find is individuals have gone through the process, essentially tried to recruit by themselves. And quite frankly, and I think Faraz can kind of speak to this as well, it's not until you're hiring your first employee that you understand how much of a time consumption it is. And I will say now, I've been in recruiting for 15 years. This market is worse than any that I've seen. Usually you could pretty actively get candidates. It wasn't a massive amount of time that was spent essentially trying to network, reaching out to individuals for recommendations, which all takes doubly the amount of time. So it's something that once they start recruiting and find out that they're several weeks in and really haven't had any candidates, that's usually when we get that call. So some of those steps to think about before you start thinking about bringing individuals on are, what type of role is it? Do you think it's something that probably isn't as niche with the skill set that you can kind of go out to your network, to your market pretty easily? If it's something more niche, I do recommend, budgets are always constrained. Try and do it yourself, but set a time limit for it. If you're not finding the results, the people that you want, then be prepared to essentially make that next step and reach out to a firm.
Great. And so a follow-up question for Becky, in insurance, what's the right time to start considering business insurance, and what are the options, and what should people expect when they first interact with you?
Absolutely. So we get to work with our partners, our companies, I don't know, our customers daily in building out. Usually it starts with the very basics of business insurance. When you start a business, you're going to need to have the right insurance coverages in place to insure the business. If you've got buildings, you need to be sure that's insured. Your cyber, especially if you're building out a tech platform. We still recommend cyber liability always, but there's just so many opportunities out there to put your business at risk that we are there to protect you from. It can start from a business owner's policy right out the gate to some general liability and things of that nature. So that's usually where we get engaged with a lot of our customers in the beginning. We don't usually start talking about health insurance and those benefits programs until you've actually started to hire people. It's kind of a catch-22. You got to have people in order to put them into an insurance program. But on the flip side of that, if we can start working with you on your business insurance as you start out, and we're watching you and we know you're hiring, maybe you're working with Ginger over at CareX and now you're starting to hire some people. It's going to be really important for us to really understand where you're hiring people, because the insurance market for health insurance is very localized. Here in Madison, it's a very HMO driven, and then you get outside of Madison and the HMOs don't really work anymore. So now you need to have a PPO offering like a United Healthcare or something of that nature that actually captures and grabs the right talent to come in and work for you outside of the Madison market. So really understanding where you're going and where you're hiring. Further complexity happens. We've seen a lot of this through COVID as startups have been evolved. They're starting to hire people outside of the state because a lot of things can be done remotely. And if I can find talent in Arizona, if I can find talent in Colorado, maybe it's a high school buddy that you want to bring into the business, we see a lot of that. But as you cross state lines, the insurance rules become incredibly different. And so you want to be sure that you are protected from a compliance standpoint, that you don't have any discrimination in your plans. A lot of times as a startup, it's really easy as you're wanting to bring in talent to want to put in a really attractive plan for one person, but you do not want to offer it to everybody because you needed to do that to bring the person in. And you can't do that. So we'll be here to remind you that that's something that you cannot do. It goes against the discrimination laws that you might have in place. And those are really common missteps that we see some startups as they're going to hire. So if we start with you with business insurance, we know where you're going, we know your business, we can pair in with our account executives on the health insurance side to start building the right program once you start really recruiting. But you do have to have a couple of people in order to actually put in a program. But again, as long as we kind of have an idea of where you're looking for that talent, and as you hire that talent, we can make sure that you have the right programs in place, because it's going to differ based off of your industry and again, the hiring locations that you have.
So as you can see, there's a lot to do with hiring in your company, but there's also a lot of partners and resources to lean on to help you through some of these growing stages. And so for us, I want to turn back to the hiring, because I know you're hiring. And oftentimes companies have that chicken and egg situation that you need to have money in order to hire, but you need to hire in order to prove that you're going to get some money. And so my ask of you is, how did you plan in your fundraising and other activities to right size the fundraising for the right number of employees to get you to your next big milestone?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the approach we took, and I don't know if it's the best approach, and Greg and might be able to comment on that. We worked with our CFO to figure out, okay, in order to hit, what's our break-even point? Because we had some idea of our expenses, and we knew what our pricing would be for our product. And for our company, it's also a little different because we are commercial. We raise our seed round with customers and revenue in the door. So we are planning to, start working with customers right off the bat versus other companies that spend a lot of time doing R&D in the beginning. So we projected out what our break-even point is, what are the kind of revenue goals we're trying to hit, and to get to those milestones, how many projects do we have to run? And we have a pretty good idea what one person in the lab, how much work they can handle, because we have been doing this for several years, so we have a pretty good idea of that. And that's how we projected out the number of people we'll need. So right now, we are really focused on people that we need in the lab. We're going to run the experiments, do the data analysis, do the reports. And the sales team right now is basically just me. which we will have to build on as we grow. So our plan right now is, the next 4 hires are going to be mostly scientists and researchers. Once we get to a certain level, I think we'll need more than one person doing the sales. So we're going to bring in a salesperson, business development people. And that's kind of how we planned it out. So going from the revenue work backwards to figure out how many people we need to generate that revenue.
Great, thank you. So Greg, for those in the audience who might be considering working at a startup, there may be some pros and cons. And I've heard the expression that working at a startup is like building a jet engine while you're flying the plane, and it's also on fire. So I know you speak to many college students, postgraduates about the pros and cons of joining a startup, and maybe you can share what some realistic experiences people could get by joining a team like Faraz's or another startup.
Yeah, that's a great question. Back in the olden days when I graduated from the university, startups, as an engineer, I didn't really think of startups as an opportunity. Certainly today, with all of the programs we have on campus and all of the startups coming off of campus, there's a lot more opportunities for students at whether you're an undergrad all the way through PhD and postdoc. There's a lot more opportunities to join a startup today than there were in previous years. And really, I think it comes down to the type of person, the type of environment that you can thrive in, right? So when I met Faraz was one of the first projects I invested in when I joined WRF. And from the first day I met Faraz, I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely wired to do a startup. It's hard to tell him what to do, and he doesn't work real well in structure. so we knew he was heading to startups. I think for folks that want to join a startup right out of school, you need to be able to thrive in ambiguity, be energized by the unknown. You need to be okay with not having a lot of formal structure. The startup companies are very lean. They're all focused on commercializing their product. They don't have a lot of extra cash sitting around to invest in training and education. So you really want to be someone that's confident in your abilities as a self-starter, fast learner. So I think folks wired like that can do quite well in a startup. But if you're the type that wants some structure, maybe feels that you want some more training, you want to learn how to maybe build a business or run a business first, going to a big company or a well-established company can be a great option. They're big and established for a reason because they're successful. They've built successful businesses through structure and knowledge of their markets, et cetera. So you can learn a lot from a large corporation, and many of them are very entrepreneurial in their own right. So it really just comes down to a kind of a personal decision. I didn't join my first startup until I was 12 years into my career. So I'd worked for a large corporation, really learned a lot about how to build a business, how to run a business, how to run sales, how to do engineering. And after that experience, I joined 2 startups where that experience was quite valuable and helpful. So I think I think it really just comes down to the personality of the individual and their willingness to accept ambiguity versus structure.
And I think Faraz expressed that well when he said, for sales, it's going to be me for a while. So the ability to wear different hats that maybe isn't what you were originally trained as an engineer or a biologist.
Well, I think that, one thing I've always say this about Faraz. Faraz, as a scientist, participated in a lot of the programs and the opportunities we have here at the university. If you're thinking about joining a startup and you're in the university right now, you have so many opportunities and resources to just start exploring those opportunities. I mean, you can talk to Faraz, you can talk to other teams that are going through our accelerator program, you can talk to companies that have come off campus, you can go talk to D2P. There's lots of ways to explore that option as a career. So I encourage you to get out there and talk to as many people and learn about what it means to be in a startup, because there is no reason to leave this university and say, well, I didn't have the opportunity, because you do. There's a lot of opportunity here.
And I think you'd be surprised at how willing people are to talk to you. I think everybody feels like they got something out of the ecosystem and they're happy to give back. And you send them an email and you're having lunch or coffee with them or whatever you can do these days with your mask on.
So I'm going to switch gears, Anne, and ask you a question, because legal issues seem to touch many aspects of business formation, from the original company formation to hiring, as well as ongoing company needs. And there are many types of lawyers. And many founders don't have experience with lawyers and what they do. So what are some of the factors you would recommend people learn about in choosing a lawyer or having a legal team? What are the variables they should consider? And what aspects are negotiable, especially for starting companies?
So as Amy said, law touches so many aspects of a startup. So when you're thinking about a lawyer to work with, it better be somebody that you can trust. You're developing a trusted relationship with them, and you shouldn't. We worked with one founder. We gave him a list of names so he could go interview them. We never would recommend just one person. He interviewed, hired a firm, and then the person that he interviewed with left the firm and they assigned somebody else. And he said, let's have coffee. I need to talk about this. I don't communicate with this person as well as I did the other person. I said, then it's time to find a new lawyer. Like, don't be afraid to leave the law firm, because it's really, you have to be able to trust what they're doing and believe in what they're doing. And if you don't, then time to start over. Things you should be looking for: someone that does startup work. And we had a call one time. I was on a call with a student, and it was an Eau Claire startup, no, a Sheboygan startup. And he said, I'm going to bring a local lawyer in, so that has been helping me with my security stuff. And he wants to listen to what you have to say. And the student starts talking, and the lawyer starts asking him questions, and the student is answering the questions. And I'm like, what is going on here? He had never done startup work before. So try to get, find some people around. All these can give you names of lawyers that do startup work, that know what they're doing. He was taking note. That lawyer was taking notes based on what a student was telling them. That is, not what you think you're paying lawyer rates for. And I guess things that are negotiable, to me, it's all about relationship. It's all about relationship. Things that are negotiable, I think you can always talk about fees. Some firms won't bend at all on fees. So you'll find that out in the conversation. Again, you can knock them off the list because they won't, or keep them on because you think they're so valuable. But I think most firms will, especially in those early stages, will come up with ways to help you get through the startup phase. And then they'll ultimately want to go to their normal rates, but that's okay. Because by the time you can afford it, you should afford to pay a lawyer, a trusted advisor, for good advice. Some firms will offer a general counsel option. So if you use a lawyer, they're working on certain things for you, but you don't just, you're not calling them all the time, because you're going to spend $100 or $200 or $500 an hour to talk to them. So they work on projects for you. Sometimes you can pay a monthly fee. You can talk to a firm about paying a monthly fee, and then you can call them whenever you want, and you don't pay by the hour. But some months you're not going to call them at all, so you will have spent that money for no reason. Other months you will have called them more and gotten more than a bargain, and you'd have to think at the end of the year whether that made sense.
Thank you. That was very helpful. One of the questions that a number of you can address is, in hiring, you want to provide carrots, incentives for people to join your team. And that can be things certainly like a salary, equity, insurance, other benefits. And so can each of you speak to how you play a role in counseling people like Faraz at the startup for how to build this compensation package that might be multifactorial? I'll start with you at the end. Yes.
Sure. So I think for us, it'll be really important to also maybe piggyback a little bit off of Ann too, picking that right insurance agent that also works in the startup space, understands the startup space and what you're facing, and that you trust that person. We do see a lot of movement in the space as well. Agents moving from one brokerage to another brokerage. And we often see the same situation where your communication is maybe not as tight. So it's a relationship that you have with your insurance agent. They really need to understand what type of talent you're looking to hire, because usually if you're trying to hire and bring in talent, you have an idea of kind of what you're looking for, what you want to do. And then we can start backfilling in the types of insurance needs that might be of interest to you, to the employees you want to bring in. And we can look to our also book of business with our other startups and what have they done, other businesses similar to you, and how do they kind of build a package that kind of fits your needs as well. And then once you start hiring and now you've got a solid base, you might pivot and change what some of those offerings might look like. And that might just be based off of what you're hearing within your employee base. What are they looking for? What are their needs? Do they have family needs that need to be met? Pet insurance comes up often, surprisingly, and it won't even be on your radar as something to think about. But we get a lot of questions for some of those unique types of offerings, and we can absolutely go out and source them. But I think it's important to know what your competition might be doing to attract that talent and how you might want to structure a program similarly.
And I think when we look at one of the first questions that I'll get is okay, I can't compete with a benefits package from a Google or Facebook. I don't think individuals that are stepping into a startup are necessarily expecting that. And what I hear time and time again from candidates is, I want a role that I love and I want to be paid fairly. So those are really the two things that I usually suggest. Focus on that. Kind of to Becky's point too, as the company grows, take the input directly from your employees as to what benefits they do want to see. Excuse me, because it does vary. And the reality is state by state, et cetera, it doesn't look the same, and even company by company. So you really can customize it. But starting out, people aren't expecting ping pong tables and nap pads and all
Might
of
be all
those
the time
things.
for it.
They want a great job they can really dig into. A lot of individuals that step into that startup space are looking for that opportunity to wear the many hats, to not be siloed, to really be able to expand their skill sets.
So I'm going to take a step back farther than when you're hiring employees. When you're first starting your company, we see a lot of companies that say, oh, I need insurance. Well, you don't have any revenue. How are you going to buy insurance? So your first line of defense for liability protection is to create a corporate entity and make sure you function like a corporate entity. You have a bank account, all your money, anything that you do for the company runs through the company, and you're not putting it in your, you're not commingling your personal assets with your business assets. And then I think you'd be surprised at how reasonably you can get some general business insurance. So once you start getting some revenue, then you can start thinking about insurance. But first, mind your P's and Q's about your entity, the kind of entity that you've picked, and you've got some liability protection, because they can't come after you. They can only go after the assets of the company, which isn't very much.
And Anne, I bet you also have discussions over equity, both at the founding stage,
That's Greg
but
and
then
I
at
can
the
talk about
recruiting
that.
stage. Can you or others speak to how to have those discussions and have everybody happy and aligned moving forward?
Well, I do think the university context, I'm going to start, Greg's going to
Yeah.
jump in. The university context presents a really unique challenge, because oftentimes it's one of the students in a lab that, and I'm not talking about you specifically for us, but it's a student in a lab that's going to be the one that leaves the lab, leaves the comfort of the university, and takes the biggest risk to start the company. But the PI thinks it was their idea, it happened in their lab, so they can have an inflated idea of how much equity they should get. And it can be very contentious for the two of them to work that out, or multiple people trying to work out how do you manage the expectations of the PI. I think that's a big deal. And I say vesting, don't give anybody shares right away, because you don't really know how this is going to work when the rubber hits the road and nobody's getting a paycheck from the university. You're only getting either vapors because you haven't generated any revenue yet, or you're getting small amounts of money. But you have ownership. So it's not an easy thing. It's now an old podcast, but it's about a guy that started a podcasting company, and it talks about him from the beginning. He walks you through him starting that business as he's doing it, and he's bringing on a partner, and he offers him like 10% ownership, and the guy walked away. And he was, you know, like they were both insulted. One guy said, you don't think I'm valuable enough. So you have to have conversations about who's making what contributions. So you can, it's easier to quantify it.
Yeah, I would say, generally, as an investor, we're using comparables and salary surveys. We're getting information from Ginger and Rebecca to understand, where's the industry trade, trending. We talk to lawyers as well because they see a lot of deals to, make sure that the employees in our companies are, and that as an investor, our companies are paying, salaries that attract the best talent and are fair. But the issues we tend to deal with the most are all around stock compensation. And it starts from the foundation at the university and it has done a nice job summarizing the challenges. And it is a real challenge. It's an issue that we deal with many of our companies, is how to make sure that, the way to think of equity is it's really for the contributions going forward. There is some equity that we give, a company will provide for founding, but really when you look at a company, I said this earlier, it's not less about the idea and more about execution now. And so the stock has to kind of reflect that, that reality. But we also run into it when when a company wants to bring in a high-powered experienced person from the corporate world. And I can't tell you how many times within the 2 startups I was part of, when we were hiring people from outside, the expectations they had for stock compensation was outrageous. And so, even having to educate, the experienced employees you're bringing in into what, how the venture capital model works and how equity is distributed in a venture-backed startup is one we deal with, in the later stage companies. But generally, I think it's the stock part of the compensation that we spend the most time navigating.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think this is a great time to now go to questions and answers from the audience.
We do have several questions online. So I'll start with one from Mary Carbine. She's asking, could the panelists speak to when to consider hiring and adding to the team versus outsourcing, such as HR communication? What's the break point? When do you know that you need to have the talent or function in-house?
And I can speak to that as well, just from what I see. Generally speaking, if it's something, usually what I recommend, if it's something shorter term, then look to outsource that, because having to go through a hire for somebody that's potentially not going to be on that long and that you're then going to essentially have to part ways doesn't make sense. So if it's something that you're looking more long-term for, and somebody that would be kind of that permanent addition, it simply makes more sense. The other side too, that sometimes works well, the outsourcing does cost more, whether you're looking at an outside vendor or looking at somebody that's essentially coming in as a contract or similar person. There is a cost associated with that. So if you do look at it in terms of being able to see, is this person a fit? Are they doing things at the level that we need them to do? And it does make sense to do that cost, because it is a savings in the long run.
So that makes me think of 2 things. One is, if you hire somebody and it's a mistake, get rid of them fast. Don't feel bad, because they probably aren't happy either. So let yourself both get out of misery and get rid of them fast. And the other thing is, the only exception I would have to, I think more and more startups are using what's called a PEO, a professional employer organization, and you can get HR services and benefits and things from them. And it is more expensive, but trying to manage all of that yourself, especially if you're somebody who is going to hire remote workers who are going to be around the country, and you have to manage the state laws of all the states in which they're living, it really helps to have someone like that, because they take charge of it. You'd have to find the right one that could do that, but they take charge of it, and they may have benefits options for you as well in those early stages, so that you could have a group to buy insurance with as a part of.
I want to maybe jump on that too for a second. So PEOs are absolutely something that we see a lot of in insurance. They cover insurance, HR needs, payroll, workman's compensation, even some 401k. So it's kind of a nice place to put all of those things, especially when you're starting out. What we do see, and just some things to know there, is that when you do enter into a PEO, you do enter into a co-employment situation. So the PEO your employees are employees of the PEO, not necessarily 100% employees of you per se, but you do still have hiring and firing and all of that good stuff. But there are some different reporting rules that kind of come into play there. But what I do see a lot of is in startups, we don't see businesses hiring HR professionals, which is where I think the PEO probably plays a really attractive role, is really in that HR professional services. But there are other ways in which you can also outsource the HR at a minimal cost and still be able to design your own benefits program that's maybe not within the walls of a PEO as well. So there are a variety of things in which you could explore that kind of encompass everything. And then there's some ways in which you can kind of plug and play based off of your needs. And that's where an insurance agent can kind of help you out. So.
Okay, I'm going to keep going because we have quite a few online. We have about 45 people online, just for the benefit of people in the room to understand. So we have a question about, and I think this is probably for Faraz, as a founder, how do you figure out which, they've written CXO role for you, CTO or CSO, fits your skills and interests, given that you're the person who's behind the idea?
Yeah, that's a good question. In our case, it was pretty natural. The co-founder, who's the other person who went full time, Dan. I remember we formed a company, and now we kind of have to decide our official title because we're fundraising, and we need to tell investors who's doing what. So yeah, we went out, grabbed a beer, and we just talked about what we wanted to do with the company. And it was very clear that Dan was more the technology side and the research side, while I was more interested in the business development. So it was very easy for us. But I could see where if multiple people are trying to be the CEO, how do you figure out? And I've seen a lot of companies having co-CEOs now. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's something that people do. So yeah.
I'll tell you that one. Bad idea.
That's a bad idea. That's
We were talking about red flags before. Bad idea.
That's a bad idea. So erase that from your
Yeah.
brain.
But I'll give you another example of a great startup, a company that spun off campus called Pyran. Came out of George Huber's lab in chemical engineering. Kevin Barnett's the CEO, and he's another one that used all the resources on the campus. And very early on said, I'm a technology person, but like I said before, right team at the right time. He was the right person to get the technology off campus. He knew the technology best. He knew how to sell the technology. He knew how to raise that first round of fundraising. But he knew really early on, like, as soon as I raise this money, I'm going to go, hire a CEO that has some, more experience in this space than I do. And that was one where he had a plan. He filled this role for now because it was the right thing to do right now. They raised their round and they brought in a phenomenal CEO. And, that's just a great story because that was one where George is just a great PI on campus. They really had, a great plan on the stock side and how to share in the equity. That was one of the cleanest ones I've seen come off campus. And again, it's, George is an experienced, I think Pyran was his second startup. Kevin used all the resources and, they transitioned their role from CEO to, CTO. That was always part of the plan.
So I do one thing that the person said was, it's my idea. So where do I fit? Greg said before that when you're forming the company, it's about what's happening in the future. So the idea evolves over time as it develops, and so it becomes the company idea, not your idea. So I think it's more important what makes you happy as a founder. Do you like the business side like Faraz does, or does that that's just not what I want to do? And I think that's what do I want going forward?
Randy Ashton is asking a question of Anne. What are some examples of tasks that a law firm would be needed for at the startup? For example, personnel hiring contracts.
Well, yeah, there would be, well, first of all, you need all your corporate documents. You need to have those in order and stored in a way that if someone wants to invest in you, you can just say, here you go, here's all my stuff. You'd have founders agreements with your fellow founders. You would have employment agreements if you're hiring anyone, independent contractors, if you're hiring independent contractors.
NDAs.
NDAs, yep. Some people don't, NDAs are an interesting, some people won't sign them, but we encourage them all the time. It's one of the documents you can get online from us because so many people want them and they go find them on the internet and they could be crazy packed full of stuff they really don't need. So we tried to come up with one that was pretty covered it all, but wasn't like 20 pages long. So I think there's a lot of things that a lawyer can help you with in those early stages. And they set the foundation, I think. And we did have a founder tell our students that the good thing about working with us was they learned how to deal with a lawyer. They were afraid of lawyers before and they didn't think they could really talk to him. And suddenly they're talking to this law student who really admits that, well, I don't know, I'll have to look that up, you know, and then all of a sudden it broke the barrier of lawyers can act kind of arrogant, I guess.
Who would have thought? Randy Ashton
Who
has
would have
another
thought, right?
question, this one for Faraz. What kind of services did you outsource at the start of your company? For example, accounting, insurance, legal, and how has that changed as you've grown?
Yeah, we are still outsourcing out a lot of these services. So our accounting is fully outsourced. Legal, yeah, we're working with outside legal firm. And we also work with a lot of consultants, even for stuff that we do in the lab. So, you know, one of the advantages there is that most of the consultants we work with, they're highly experienced, you know, industry people. These are people, if you wanted to bring in full time, would be very expensive. And, you know, so people that we want to bring in as we grow, but at this time, it doesn't make sense for us to have them full time in the company. So yeah, we still outsource out most of the things we do.
And you can get pretty far without, you know, with outsourcing HR and accounting and legal. I was just trying to think through our portfolio. You know, most of, you know, we have seed, Series A, Series B. Even some of our Series B companies are still outsourcing a lot of their kind of back office.
Yeah, and Greg said earlier about working for a established company versus working for a startup, the differences. I think if you hire consultants that really know what they're doing, you get a little bit of the benefit of working for a bigger company because they know what they're doing and you can watch and learn from them. So there's benefits to doing it, and it's smart to not commit your money if you don't have to.
Chris Holland has a question about, and I'm not sure to whom it's best directed. Can you talk about how to foster good communication across a new team, especially at a startup? I can imagine it being exceedingly important to make sure the environment is right for clear and honest communication.
I'm old, so I still like face-to-face communication. I've had this conversation with a lot of new companies that have new, founders that have just left college or graduated college, and they insist that you can build culture and have strong communication over Zoom and through text and email. But I still believe there's nothing, for me, I like to have face-to-face communication. I think there's lots of things we learned with Zoom that, yeah, we can use Zoom effectively. But for me, nothing beats sitting down with like our portfolio companies and just talking to them face-to-face.
I think it's important to create a really open dialogue culture too when you do that. So it's very inclusive and people feel comfortable speaking up. I think that's incredibly important, especially as you build a startup with the teams, because you're going to be learning a lot through the process, and sometimes your team is going to teach you a lot through that process as well. So as open as you can be to the feedback that you might receive, whether it's something you do something with it or not. I think the open communication is really important to fostering a really good team culture.
And I think it's something you have to plan for.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to, you have to figure out ways that you're going to communicate. And it may not, I agree. I think in person, I missed in person. It's great to be able to see people because it's a different kind of interaction. But I think the reality is people don't want full-time in person. So you're going to have a combination of ways that you're communicating with people, but you should consciously think about that because that's part of, you're going to consciously create your culture or that will be the best culture if you think about it and do things that allow you to plan for it and make it happen.
We have a question from Eric Oberstar asking, I think this is for Greg, how commercial ready does a medical device technology need to be for accelerator versus venture? These technologies can have a significant commercial runway before FDA clearance and eventual sales.
Yeah, so accelerator, for our accelerator, and it's a bit of a misnomer because this, our accelerator is more of a technology de-risking fund. So we're investing in technologies that are still on campus, pre-license, pre-company. Again, really to fund a milestone that helps us to either more effectively license the technology or to attract investors. So in Faraz's case, we invested in the prototype of the instrument that they built their business around. And so that's pretty early funding. As part of that funding, we do like to sit down with the project team and plan out what the path to market is. So if it is a medical device, we want to start laying out that plan of regulatory and payer. Very important. It's one of those areas we're so glad to have Amy as part of D2P because she's been very helpful in helping our projects understand how hospitals will look at these devices. So we do engage as part of our accelerator projects, consultants and experts that help those project teams at least start to develop that plan. Then in terms of Worth Ventures, we're investing in medical device companies that, have not been through the regulatory process yet, but as part of the license and as part of the investment, they have to have that plan. They put that plan as part of their uses of funds, right? So, we're investing in a team again around execution. As part of that execution, we want to see that plan and we want to see, how much money are you going to need to get to the next stage and how much more money are you going to need to get it through the FDA, and then, how much money are you going to need to, build your sales and marketing. So, Accelerator and Worth Ventures invest early in these medical device opportunities.
A question from an anonymous participant. For solo versus co-founders, what are some common issues that each kind of structure or co-founding team encounter?
I think you need a team.
Yeah.
I think it's lonely to try to start a business by yourself of any kind. It's great to have somebody to commiserate with, to talk things through. I think people have said, oh, you learn from everybody you talk to, you learn something. So I would highly discourage someone from a solo startup. And sometimes the attraction is, oh, I can own it all.
Right.
But you're going to own a little pie, where with people and good ideas, you'll own a bigger pie.
Yeah, actually, it's an interesting question because I have done a presentation before on teams. So I have some facts around solo founders versus balanced teams. Solo founders take almost 4 times longer to reach scale. They are 2.5 times less likely to pivot, whereas balanced teams raise 30% more money, and they'll see 3% more, 3x more user growth. So I think,
At least my instinct
yeah,
is
your
right.
instinct is right. And then I have some other data from Shark Tank. So single teams in Shark Tank only succeed 44% of the time. People with 2 or more, it's almost 60. It's over 60%. So, I think that's what I mentioned earlier. What do we look for when we're investing in a team? We're looking for folks that understand the importance of having a team and not going at it alone.
Couple questions along those lines for Faraz. One is, if you do have co-founders, how do you meet and decide to go into business with your other founders? I'm guessing Faraz, you're probably the best person to address that.
Is the question who does what, or
how did you find the magic, I think, to come together and decide you want to start a company?
How did he find his spouse? I think it's the same
Right.
question.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so our co-founders are, as I mentioned previously, all co-inventors of the technology. So we worked on the technology together. When it was time to spin out the business, Dan and I were the 2 out of the 6 who wanted to do this full time. Everyone else decided that they're gonna either take a part-time role or be an advisor and not pursue this full time. So it just happened very naturally based on everyone's interest.
And-
When we initially started,
The question was the equity split equal, right? Just so everyone can. hear.
yeah. So when we started the company back in 2018, and at that time we were not commercial. Again, it was 6 co-inventors of the technology. We did end up splitting it evenly 6 ways. And maybe Anne and Greg can comment on if that's a good idea or not. But then once the company was, I guess, spun out officially, we went commercial and we raised money. Then the cap table was reconfigured based on who's taking an active role in the company.
I have one last question that I think is a really good fit for the panel. So even though we're at time, I'm going to go ahead and throw it to the group. Any suggestions on building teams when campus PIs have only minimal interest in founding a company, but a student or postdoc in the lab realizes a team is needed, but lacks the network to pull in the right founders? Who on campus can help with that? It's kind of a softball for the group assembled here, I think.
Sure. Well, I mean, like Greg said, I literally took advantage of every single resource on campus and in Madison. And these are all free resources and everyone is super willing to help. And these are things that you wouldn't really get anywhere else in terms of like how easy and easily accessible they are. So, D2P has been a great resource. G-Beta, which is a generator accelerator program, was a great resource. NADWorks was extremely important and helpful that Anne runs. And there's a lot of other resources that I'm forgetting about. There's a mortgage entrepreneurship bootcamp that is super helpful. The business school is always available to help. So tons of resources. And if you go to D2P, I think it's sort of like the one-stop shop where they will connect you to everyone else. So that's where I would start.
Perfect advertisement.
Yes,
for our
thank you very
team.
much.
And I
Right.
think-
We at D2P would like to be your front door. We'll help you navigate and match the resource that you need at the right time.
So I think we're going to have to leave it there.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us and talking about team building. We really appreciate your attendance.